This is the Leadership Podcast, and we study leaders. This is episode 495, featuring Patrick Veroneau, author of The Leadership Bridge and soon to be released, The Missing Piece, What Great Teams Do That Others Overlook, and CEO of Emery Leadership Group. Thank you for joining us today. This is Jim Vassilopoulos, founder of Rafty Advisors, and this is the Leadership Podcast.
Hey everybody, Jan Rutherford here, founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for making us a part of your day as we study leaders, and you can find all our past episodes at theleadershippodcast.com.
Yeah, and we are so fortunate to have our podcast sponsored by the wonderful folks at Darley. They're trusted by warfighters and firefighters since 1908. Darley is dedicated to equipping our military and first responders with the essential tools they need for mission success, from fuel and firefighting pumps to drones and tactical solutions. Discover more about this incredible company and the people who serve our nation's heroes at darley.com. That's DARLEY.com. Darley, you serve others, we serve you.
Yeah, and our guest today is Patrick Veroneau, and he's a husband and a father and CEO of Emery Leadership Group for 20 plus years. He's helped people in business, sports, and life build great teams. And he's the author, as Jim said, of The Missing Piece and creator of the Cables and SCC frameworks. And we're going to learn a lot more about you starting right now with our first question, Patrick. What's not in the public bio?
So what is not in the public bio? I am actually the youngest of 10 kids. So I guess if we talk about teams, we had our own basketball team, right? 6 boys,
Wow.
4 girls.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
That's not something you hear of very often. So were you spoiled? The spoiled
No,
one?
we had no money. I was not spoiled.
So nobody was spoiled.
No, as a matter of fact, we always joke that, I think the further down the line you went, I said my parents had us so that we could work around the
Wow.
house.
So what's the age gap between you and the oldest?
So 15 years is the
Oh,
age
that's
gap.
it?
Yeah, 15 years. And my mother had 4 miscarriages.
Oh my gosh. My great-grandmother was pregnant 16 times, 9 births, and the youngest didn't meet my grandmother until she was 18. She didn't meet one of her siblings till she was 18 years old. What about you, Jim?
Well, my father's family was pretty big in Greece, and half of them stayed in Greece, half of them came here. But I'm really curious, Patrick, do you think that the experience of growing up in such a large family helped you become a good leader, help you in business more than, let's say, maybe someone who's only an only child?
Absolutely. And it's funny, it was brought up to me by somebody that I was interviewing, and she had asked me the size of my family. And she's like, that's probably part of your intuitiveness or your ability to read things, because as the youngest, especially, I was always around older individuals that were having adult conversations, so to speak. And that was just the world that I grew up in. So I think I grew up a lot faster than probably most kids my age. And I think one of the sadder parts of that is that both my parents passed away when I was young. I was 17 when my mom died from breast cancer. My dad died my freshman year of college, about a year and a half later, of pancreatic cancer. So I was 17 and 18 at that point. And that really, I think, shaped me even more so. But I think being in the family that I was in some ways prepared me for it.
Wow.
This is so fascinating, Patrick. I just want to ask you, are all your siblings still alive?
They are. Yeah. All my siblings are still alive. And all of them live in fairly close proximity. And we're actually all very close.
Wow. The reason your parents had all the kids, was there a reason, or that's just how it was back then?
Irish, Catholic, French. That was it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
It really was I look back on that as very special times. We
Yeah.
had no money, but I never
Yeah.
felt poor.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. Well, let's dig into the leadership stuff. That's just fascinating. So in the Leadership Bridge, you talk about the connection between intention and impact. And I've
Yeah.
been talking about intention all week. Intention's great, but without the discipline, to have impact, forget it. Why do you think so many leaders fall short in closing that gap? And what do you find that helps him cross that bridge?
This is something I've thought a lot about, especially lately. And I think when I say this at first, it turns people off because I say, I'm not a fan of book clubs. And people are like, well, wait a minute, you're not a fan of book clubs. You read a lot of books. I think what happens when we intellectually understand concepts but don't apply them, to me, that's what I find happens in book clubs oftentimes. The downside of it.
Yeah.
We think that we've got the concept figured out, but we forget how long it takes to implement and apply the concepts for them to actually work. And two of the things that I talk about in the leadership bridge around that area are a couple behaviors. One is around consistency. That's the first cable that I talk about. And it really is about walking the talk. Is what I say and what I do the same thing? And I think at times that's where we lose credibility as leaders, that we expect things from other people, but we don't, even maybe intentionally, but we don't do the same things ourselves. We don't model those.
We had a guest on, studied the Challenger and Columbia accidents, and he'd been an astronaut, and
Sure.
he said something to the effect that we remember, but we don't learn from history. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think there's probably some truth to that. Well, and especially the longer it goes, right?
Yeah.
We remember the things that we want to remember too, the way our brain works. So I do think that can probably happen.
Yeah.
And there are so many biases or unconscious biases, right? Overconfidence bias is one of them,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That we
That Daniel Kahneman talked about so much.
yeah, or Dunning-Kruger effect, a lot of those that and I think on some level those serve us, because without having some level of overconfidence, I don't think we would take the risks that we take, but it has to be balanced with understanding like we have limits. And I think that's where humility is the circuit breaker on that.
Yep.
Yeah. This is interesting.
That's an interesting circuit breaker.
Yeah, this is an area that, of course, I have a keen interest on, is like the neuroscience and how our brains work and how we kind of process information to our benefit and our detriment in many ways in our lives. What are some of the insights that you've found in your kind of studies from brain science that people overlook, specifically when it comes to like building trust and driving or accountability or holding people accountable?
Yeah, I think there are a number of them, but I'll give you two that I think are really important in terms of the work that I do, especially around teams. Is one is based off of some work that was done by a neuroscientist named David Rock, and he came up with a model called the SCARF model, where he talks about these 5 human drivers that we all have. And the R in that model is relatedness and our need for connection. And what's fascinating about that one, when we talk about building trust in teams, is that when people experience social exclusion or rejection, the same part of the brain that experiences physical pain is the part of the brain that's active when people feel as though they're excluded from a group, which I think is really powerful to think about in terms of the impact that we have over other people in terms of how do we bring them into our group versus how they felt outside of the group. I think another really powerful one, I would certainly say it builds trust, is that around recognition. And this is some research that looks at what happens when people were recognized and it wasn't expected versus what happens when people were recognized, it was expected. And then what happens when people feel like they should be respected or appreciated and they're not. And I speak about this a lot in the work that I do with teams, is that when you are recognized and you don't think you should be, your dopamine level spikes. Dopamine spikes when you get recognized and you weren't expected, right? So that's like you're in your group, people don't expect it, and you thank them or give them an award or something, and they weren't expecting it. If they're just recognized, if it was an awards banquet and they know it's coming, dopamine level still goes up, but not to the same extent as when it's unexpected. I think the most important part of that, though, is that when people felt they should be recognized and they weren't, which I think happens more often, is dopamine levels actually decreased. So not even like it's a neutral when you don't recognize people. It's when people feel as though they've been working really hard and they're not appreciated, their dopamine levels go down, which I would simply associate that with what we experience around disengagement in organizations.
Yeah. I mean, I really like that. And I think you're spot on with that stuff. I'm kind of curious. I want to dig into that relatedness portion.
Sure.
Almost kind of tied into, one of our former guests, Sebastian Younger, who talked about the tribes. He wrote the famous book Tribe. And, I think about that connectedness And I look at organizations where, we've gotten bigger than, let's say, Dunbar's number, the 150 that we think we can have relations with. And, our connected world where, we've got, you know, thousands of friends, quote, in Facebook or in LinkedIn and stuff like that. And, we're well beyond what our human capacity is to kind of manage that. Is that making it harder to have those relations? Or is it making it, are these tools actually making it easier or is it harder? Especially as organizations grow,
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there certainly needs to be more intentionality in terms of making connections, right? Especially when we go into more of a hybrid environment. But again, when we go back to a couple great books out there, one is called The Good Life, which is, I'm blanking on the author of this book. I think it's Waldinger. He's a Harvard researcher, and it's based on the longest ongoing study on happiness ever done. It's 80 plus years long. And what's interesting about that was happiness was equated with meaningful relationships. That was the key. Not just relationships, all right? Not 100 Facebook or 1,000 Facebook friends. Meaningful relationships. That's it. Just meaningful. I don't think it's that hard to believe. Let's just say that. What's interesting is I working with a management group not that long ago, and we were talking about this, about belongingness as a behavior that I talk about in cables. And he mentioned a company that he had come from was a bilingual company. He was the only person in this group that didn't speak French. He said when they went for lunch together, the whole group spoke in French. And he said it was the most difficult time he has ever had in an organization. And I immediately went to the physical pain that he was probably feeling in his brain because he was excluded, right? He's in a group that they're breaking bread, eating lunch, and he's the only one that doesn't know what the conversation is.
Wow. Hey, what I'm thinking about is, kind of a basic definition of leadership. We often think of the best leaders we ever had. We're like, gosh, I would do anything for this person. I mean, this person calls, I'd climb walls, crawl on glass, anything. And I was thinking the other day, the simplest definition I've never seen, but I was thinking of like, how would I define leadership these days? And it was like getting people to give their very best. I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking about. And it made me go back to a former guest we've had on, Tim Cole, who always asked me, hey, is your team compliant or committed? What do you think, the practices or conversations that help move to that, sort of commitment from people that it really inspires them? What is it that we need to do in 2025 and beyond that maybe we haven't been doing very well?
Interesting you ask it that way. And when you talk about compliance, I think accountability. And if you look at a lot of the Google searches as it relates to words around accountability, whether it's accountability systems or employee accountability, that has increased over the last 5 years. Yet if you also look at research by organizations like Gallup, this last round of Gallup surveys, employee engagement is at a 10-year low.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's a correlation there that when we focus on accountability, to me, that's the low bar. And if you were to look at sort of the etymology of the word accountability, one of the words is reckoning, right? That doesn't really feel very good to have a reckoning. Whereas when we look at ownership, that's about possession. And I think that's really what we need to focus on. We've spent time focused on building more accountability systems, and I call it the accountability paradox, is that we're trying to solve problems by adding more accountability, and we're actually getting farther away from ownership when we do it. And that's the only way we're really going to solve these problems. I think there's an actual sequence that works here to get that, is that the way that I phrase it is that average and struggling organizations, they focus on accountability first, and then they support people and recognize people. Great teams don't do that, whether it's in sports or in organizations. They support each other, celebrate each other, and then they create ownership, which is inclusive. Accountability is included in ownership,
Yeah.
but not the reverse.
Jim, as a partner in this podcast, from the very early days, always you would use the expression to me, I trust you. 3 words, I trust you. And I remember at the time, 9+ years ago, I thought, oh, that's weird. You don't know me that well yet. I mean, are you manipulating me? Do you really trust me? What's going on here? And, it became something that really did build trust, among us. But it's so hard for people, for leaders, to basically trust people, to empower them, to give them that ownership, that responsibility. And we know, people support what they help create. I mean, what would you say to those leaders that, that don't trust? I mean, do they have to trust first and
Have to
then be
trust first.
vulnerable?
Jan, so this was a conversation that I had. I had Stephen Covey on as a guest probably 2 years ago at this point, maybe, on the book that he had written at that point was called Trust and Inspire. And it was really interesting to hear him speak about trust, in that generally we look at trust as, how do I get you to trust me? Right? How do you trust me as a leader? What do I need to do? And he said, we've got it backwards. We need to trust other people first. You need
Yeah.
to give before you get. And I do think that there's an inherent risk there, right? Because especially if I'm somebody that really feels I need a lot of control over things, I don't like uncertainty, but it really is, it's like, you have to do that first. And I think,
Yeah.
and when I speak about that with individuals or groups, we'll talk about this. I will always phrase it to say, is there anybody in here that they had somebody that they reported to that gave them a task or a responsibility that when they gave that to them, they thought to themselves, I'm not qualified to do this. And usually we all raise our hands, right? That was a leader that was saying, I trust you. I'm going to give you this responsibility. I know you haven't done this before. And the next question I ask is, what did that do for you? Did that motivate you more to make sure that you didn't fail at this thing? And almost every person says yes. It motivated them more. It's like, you give me that responsibility. I don't want to let you down
Right.
because you trust me. And that's
Yeah.
the shift that happens.
Hopefully a good segue here is, our sponsor obviously trusts us because they keep sponsoring our show, and we appreciate that. And they've been around since 1908. That's a long time.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to really know, gosh, what they've been through, people they trusted and people that let them down and people that blew away their expectations. But, Darley is a family-owned business, and they're based in the Midwest values, and they're a trusted partner of the U.S. military and first responders. And they have mission-critical defense equipment, innovative firefighting solutions, and they equip our heroes for success. And you can learn more about their dedication to excellence at darley.com. That's DARLEY.com.
Yeah. They're a great company who's earned the trust, of the people who we trust to take care of us when we're in times of need. I just think it's such a great story, such good people there. I want to dig into an area, and we kind of touched on it earlier. You may have actually answered it in part, but, you know, I think some of the greatest times in my career have been with really high performing teams. Like, you just like, wow, and wish you could get the band back together. Those team experiences are just amazing. And so, you talk about these kind of maybe subtle behaviors that distinguish, like, the greatest teams and the missing piece, your book there. But I'm just kind of curious, what is the invisible habit that you think separates, the good from the great?
The invisible habit. In terms of, I think, teams, one of the things that I break out on that is celebrate. And again, I think that's the piece that we often don't do well enough in terms of, I would say, average or struggling teams. And that invisible habit is not just recognizing the final outcome, but it's recognizing progress along the way. And I think that is really important, because what it does is it motivates people to recognize, yeah, we're not where we need to be yet, but we're appreciating the journey that we're on, and we're appreciating the contributions that each person is making for us to get to that place that we're trying to get to.
Yeah. And I think that's so important because I can't remember what guest it was, but we were talking about a psychological study that they did with people who they had two groups. There were maybe like three groups. There was a control group, and they were on a new diet and exercise program. And at the end of it, they would bring you in after you had your weekly meeting with the physician to weigh you and check your body fat. At the end, they'd put you in a room, and the room had like apples in it, and then it also had like a Snickers bar or a cupcake or something like that. And depending on what they said to you as you exited the room, your behavior would change. So if they said, "Congratulations on, losing weight this week," you would get a Snickers bar or you would get a cupcake. If they said, "Hey, I really appreciate and you should be proud of your commitment to eating healthy or being healthy," those people would choose the apple. Okay. And so I always thought it was interesting because there's that subtle little thing you're hanging your hat on there with your last answer, which is it's not about the final outcome. It's about your commitment to the process. It's about your ongoing commitment. And I think, there's a lot of psychological study that supports like that is really the key.
Yeah. And again, I think that's where you lose people, especially if there's a long time horizon before you're actually going to meet your end goal. If you don't set up waypoints along the way where you're encouraging people in terms of what they're doing, the contributions they're making, you just lose people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so essential. And I mean, this seems kind of obvious. I mean, it's like, if you played youth sports or did anything else like that, what like really pumped your tires, what made you feel good. And before anyone really got into a management or leadership position, you were the one being led. And so you kind of know what makes you feel good. Why do so many leaders like not realize that and forget it and just like not practice it?
It's a great question. I think most people don't go through formalized leadership programs to begin with at the start of their careers, so they don't fully appreciate all that goes into it. I do think that being around other people that encourage that same environment, right? It's contagious. When you're around those people, you feed off of each other. And I think that's the thing with great teams is that great teams, it takes a lot of effort to get to that point of building a great team. It's like building a bridge. All the effort is in the beginning of getting the bridge up, the materials, the resources. Once it's built, it just needs to be maintained.
So, Patrick, what's come up a lot in the last 5 years has been, remote and hybrid and all that stuff. And you've phrased it in a way I really like is how do we bridge the gap in distance and difference? And I mean, everybody's looking for that. Leaders will talk about culture and gosh, I've got to have people around me to have culture. I've got to have people around me to innovate and brainstorm and all those different things. Everybody's really struggling with this to this day. And there's a article came out the other day that people would take a pay cut to have a remote job. What's your thoughts on it these days for leaders? The best way to handle this. I mean, can they really allow people to have the best of both worlds and still have a great company and great culture?
It's a really tricky subject right now, and I feel like we're in the Wild West. Nobody knows what this thing's really gonna look like. I think the companies that are not flexible on this are the ones that will be at a disadvantage. I'll sort of start there. That said, we need connection. There's no way around it. You don't build relationships with people without connection. Evolution says that. We're pack animals. We need that. How we do that going forward, I think, is just going to need to be more creative in terms of how that happens. I came from an environment, and Jana, I think you're probably familiar with this, is that we were remote
Yeah.
as sales reps. We were in different areas, but what we did was probably once a quarter or once every so often, we got together as a group. And that was enough to build those connections so that when we went away again, we were able to just maintain those through phone calls and things like that. I think there's got to be some of that. There has to be some ability for people to get together to touch each other in that way, right? Break bread together, shake hands, but we're just going to have to be more creative
Yeah.
as to how that happens.
Well, you're hitting on something. I mean, sales teams have been remote forever. I mean, that's what they are. I go back and I think we got together for 2 days every 6 weeks, 2 solid days. But the agenda, the meeting was very carefully crafted that it was really collaborative and innovative. It wasn't, we went to the meeting, we put headphones on and we opened our laptop and typed. I mean, that's not what happened in those meetings.
And that's a great point, because what I would say is what you can't do is have people come back into an office for stuff that they're doing at home, because they will resent that. They will say, wait a minute, why do I have to drive here when this is the same stuff I'm getting paid to do probably more effectively at home? It has to be intentional, I would say, just like we used to go through. You'd get together and you'd work on problems or things to improve the business or
Yeah.
anything like that. Not just like, we're just going to sit here and do the same work we're doing remote.
Yeah, and I think we're hitting on something really important. I hope people are hearing this, is to basically say you got to come in the office 1 day a week, 3 days a week, and they come in and they put their headphones on and they work. It's crazy.
It really is.
And I go to so many organizations, they don't even have whiteboards or flip charts. They aren't, I mean, how do you collaborate? How do you brainstorm anything if you're not cultivating that? And it kind of goes back to the point that, most people in leadership roles are not very good facilitators. I mean, they just aren't. And we're basically going, well, hey, just bring in people and have a collaborative, meeting. People don't even know where to start to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
what's a starting point for these people?
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I want to take a step back, because this is
Yeah.
such an important topic, and we're in such an infancy standpoint or stage of this. And what I mean by that, I was working with a company in DC, and this is, let's say, 3 years ago. It was about 3 years ago I was working with them. They're in DC. Everybody was still fairly remote at this point. They had a core group that was in there, but they were starting to mandate that people come back into the office. And to me, the difference 3 years ago, or when COVID hit, if you think about it in terms of organizations, when we all went to our homes, when we couldn't go into an office anymore, we had already built relationships. We knew each other, right? So it's easy to pick up the phone or get on a Zoom call. We already know each other. Think of onboarding people remotely, right? And my son was one of those. He's 27 years old. He had to remote from an apartment. He has no context of culture. You know what I mean? He has no connections with people other than this. You can't build that. And I think going forward, that really is the risk we run, is a complete disconnect, because we onboard people remotely. Sounds great, but at some point that's going to come back around to bite us, because we also have no connections.
Yeah.
Yep.
I couldn't agree more. And I think about it. I think we really touched on something important here. We're really giving our younger workers a disservice, our newer workers to the organization. And, getting together once a quarter, like to do an escape room, doesn't necessarily build, a whole lot of continuity with your team. It's like, we have to work together. We have to think together. We have to work on the business together. So Patrick, couldn't agree more. I think that's a really great insight. I'm glad you shared it with us.
As I said, this is the Wild West right now. Nobody has the solution to this, but I think those that aren't flexible to exploring what this is going to look like will be the ones that I think will be at the greatest disadvantage.
Yeah. What I really appreciate about our conversation today, Patrick, is like, we're geeks about leadership, Jan and I, and you are too, I can tell, And so, we sit here and like, you've read books I haven't read. You've learned things I haven't learned. You've got the opinions that are like, wow, that's a nuance that I hadn't really thought of. And I really appreciate that. Obviously, you've been doing this for a long time, and you've actually had a podcast of your own where you talk to other people and learn quite a bit. As you kind of look back on all the stories you've heard and lessons you've learned, is there one that kind of stands out to you that's just like, wow, this was a moment where someone else taught me something, and you had to take a step back and go, wow, that like new doors just opened for me today.
Yeah. Well, I kind of mentioned one of them in the Stephen Covey conversation around trust and just how to look at it differently. But another one really stands out to me, and this was an individual. His name was Cutler Dawson. I had him as a guest on the podcast. And Cutler was, I believe he was a Rear Admiral in the Navy for 30 years. And then he went on to become the president of Navy Federal Credit Union, which is the largest credit union in the world. And after he retired, he was like a cult legend at Navy Federal. They paid a ghostwriter to interview him to write a book, and the book is called From the Sea to the C-Suite. And it's a great little book to read, so, sort of his insights, great stories in there. But one of the ones that stood out to me when I was interviewing him, I said, Cutler, what was it about you that made you so successful in both military and in the private sector in terms of leading people? And his answer was walking the deck plates. It wasn't his level of authority. It was walking the deck plates. And he talked about it in that by walking the deck plates, he connected with anybody he could in terms of at all levels of the organization. And it just reinforced to me that we've overcomplicated this in terms of what it means to lead. It's about feeling and presence that he provided for people. It was the experience that he provided for them. Right now, if he had been a tyrant and he was walking the deck plates, that wouldn't be great. But he had this way about him that he was sincerely interested in other people. And he did it by what he called walking the deck plates. And it's just always stood out to me.
Yeah, I absolutely love that because I mean, I think it was early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and there was the management mantra, like management by walking around, which
Yeah.
is, I think, very similar kind of concept. But I just think that, you know, that is such a simple answer to something where we have, as you stated earlier, totally overcompensated on like accountability systems. I mean, like no one needs another new KPI. It's just like we're drowning in metrics. And actually, by the time you get like 5 of them, like 3 of them conflict with one another, or it's almost a guarantee that, the department you need to collaborate with the most has at least 2 that conflict with yours. And so,
Yeah.
we're creating so much connective tissue, we're losing our flexibility as humans.
Yeah. Do you mind if I'll give you one sort of little example I'll do when I'm doing workshops with the groups that I work with? I'll ask people, can you think about somebody that you know that truly has your back? Absolutely has your back. And everybody can think about it. I said, now imagine that person calls you up and your schedule is loaded with stuff. And they call you up and say, I'm in a jam right now. Can you help me out? Who in here is not going to find a way to help that person out? And why is that? It's because they've got your back, right? That's the first piece, the support. So then what I ask them is I say, now let's imagine we're not special in this room just because we're in supervisory roles. Why wouldn't the people that report to you do the same thing for you? If they truly felt you had their backs and you needed them, they would do the same thing for you. That's what you need to build.
Yeah.
If you do that, you create ownership, not accountability.
I was thinking about all the tours I've had of companies, factories, companies, warehouses, and I've been on some where you walk around and nobody says anything to the guy giving you the tour, the CEO. And then I've been on some where, they're asking about their kids and the soccer game. And the person I just got off the phone with, he said, I was in this part of our office and I just sat on the couch with the guy, that's in IT. And we were just sitting there on this couch and he's like, you know what that wall needs? That wall needs, our mission and our objectives. And they had this whole conversation. And I'm like, yeah, this guy's on the right track. This guy's on the right track. Patrick, this has been great and it's flown by. What sort of closing thought would you have for our learning leaders today?
I would say don't settle for accountability. It's the low bar. Shoot for ownership. It's available to everybody, and that's what great teams do, but it's all based on behaviors. Have people's backs, celebrate them, recognize what they do, and then you'll be able to really challenge each other to be better.
And can I, real quick follow up? So what about someone that hears that and goes, well, yeah, we don't have equity.
So I'll give you the answer that I give to all my kids is that to be on a great team, you have to first commit to being a great teammate. Have to do that first. It's all I can control. And that, as I told my kids, I'm like, that doesn't even guarantee you'll be part of a great team. But what I can guarantee you is if you don't commit first to being the great teammate, you absolutely won't be part of a great team because you're the weakest link at that point.
On the last Crucible expedition I ran, we had a veteran on the trip that basically, he was just super helpful. I mean, he was just working all the time. And at one point he said to everybody, hey, key to a good team, look for work, look for stuff to do, like look where you can help. And it became contagious. And I'm thinking, we talked about it out in the woods. We said, how rare is it when you've got a hybrid team of people all over, somebody finishes up on Friday at 2:00, they call their buddy and say, hey, are you getting out of the office now? Is there anything I can help you with before I call it a day? Like, and everybody goes, that never happens. That never happens. But wouldn't it be nice?
You get that with ownership. You wouldn't get that with
Yeah.
accountability, because accountability is
Yeah.
just, I got my stuff done.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. I absolutely love this discussion. I've so enjoyed it. Patrick, thank you for being a guest.
Oh, thank you. This has been wonderful. I so appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, lovely discussion. Lots of nuggets for our listeners. So please make sure you get the show notes, subscribe to our email list. And Patrick, anything you want to learn about him or connect up with him, you can find that on leadershippodcast.com. And remember, leadership is not about a title or a designation. It's about impact, influence, and inspiration. Impact involves getting results. Influence is about spreading the passion you have for your work, and you have to inspire teammates and customers. Robin Sharma. It's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Podcast. To listen to more shows or to access the books and content discussed on this show, be sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. The material in this podcast is copyright by Rafti Advisors and Self-Reliant Leadership and must have written approval before commercial application.